Welcome to NTD News. I'm Kevin Hogan. Here are today's top stories. Tonight, President Biden set to give his first big speech to Congress. What will he talk about and how will it be different this time? 4 Texas counties declare a disaster stemming from the immigration crisis at the border. This as the Biden administration continues to roll back Trump-era policies. The election audit in Maricopa County is allowed to continue for now, but will an investigation into the audit be allowed to proceed? The Supreme Court will hear arguments in a First Amendment case this week. An attorney on the case says it could be a blockbuster decision. Senate members question the U.S. envoy to Afghanistan about how President Biden's troop pullout will affect human rights in the country. President Biden's first big speech to Congress is coming up tonight on the eve of his first 100 days in office. The White House says attendance will be much lower than normal because of the pandemic.
President Biden set to give his first speech to a joint session of Congress Wednesday. The press secretary says his major policy announcement will be the American Families Plan.
He will also use the speech as an opportunity to talk about many of his other priorities, including police reform, immigration, gun safety, his ongoing work to get the pandemic under control, and to putting Americans back to work.
Only about 200 lawmakers received tickets to attend, much smaller than normal. A reporter asked the press secretary if there'll be a designated survivor in case something happens.
There does not need to be a designated survivor because the cabinet will be watching from their offices or home, but they will not be joining him for the speech.
The Constitution Center says the designated survivor tradition dates back to the Cold War. Usually, one top official is chosen not to attend a joint session of Congress. If something happens, they can then take over. And Republican senators who plan to attend the speech are voicing skepticism about Biden's approach.
He's a modest man, but based on his record, he's got much to be modest about. He clearly believes that he can tax, spend, and regulate our country into prosperity.
Senator Mike Braun says there's been a lot of talk about unity and getting Republicans involved, but he wants to see if there's something more tangible.
But when it comes to COVID relief, there wasn't much of anything in there that we would have been interested in other than the relief itself. It was much broader. Likewise, on the infrastructure discussion, it looks like it's that same approach. So,
Republican leader Mitch McConnell says Biden ran as a moderate, but he can't think of anything Biden's done so far that indicates some degree of moderation.
So bait and switch strikes me as the best way to describe the Biden administration, at least so far.
Senator Tim Scott will give the Republican response to the president's speech.
4 counties in Texas make disaster declarations due to the immigration crisis. They say their residents are at imminent risk and they don't have the resources to contain the threat. Goliad is one of 4 Texas counties to declare a disaster. Their declaration reads, "The ongoing border crisis has resulted in thousands of illegal aliens invading South Texas and overwhelming our local, state, and federal law enforcement." Kinney County also declared a disaster. Brad Coe is the county sheriff there. He told the Epic Times he only has 6 full-time deputies and too much territory to cover. He says, "My guys have been in more pursuits in the past year than most police officers will do in a lifetime. We're catching more and more every day. We file charges, then we have to let them go because our jails are full." Goliad County Sheriff Roy Boyd says things had been coming under control during the last administration. He says that came to a real fast end, and it's the Wild West on steroids. Additional problems are coming in with the immigrants. According to Customs and Border Patrol statistics, seizures of drugs and guns is skyrocketing, especially fentanyl. And another MS-13 gang member was caught crossing the border with immigrants in Arizona. The Biden administration responds to the new developments by rolling back more Trump-era policies. It now prohibits Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE agents, from making arrests in or near courthouses. And President Joe Biden just nominated Trump critic Ed Gonzalez to lead ICE. He criticized Trump for authorizing large immigration raids and stopped his county's program to closely cooperate with ICE. Now, senators are holding discussions about moving forward with other parts of Biden's immigration platform. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says the crisis should be addressed first.
I can't imagine that we would take up an immigration-related bill, no matter how worthy it might be, without insistence on our part that we address the obvious crisis at the border that is directly related to what appeared to be an invitation by the new president to come on up.
Goliad County Judge Mike Bennett signed his county's declaration. He expects 200 or more Texas counties will join them. Kinney County Attorney Brent Smith says the state should declare an emergency. Then Texas could enforce its own border with Mexico to protect its citizens. Sheriff Boyd says he's given up hope that the federal government will help. So, he says, Texas has to fix the problem themselves, and if they don't, he says, it will all be over and the United States will be no more. It looks like Americans will have more time to update their identification to Real ID. The new deadline to switch over is May 3rd, 2023. By then, every air traveler 18 years and older will need a Real ID compliant driver's license or identification card to board an airplane or enter a federal building. The department has repeatedly extended the Real ID deadline because of the pandemic. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says many driver licensing agencies are still operating at limited capacity, and he wants to give states more time. Currently, Homeland Security says only 43% of all state-issued IDs are Real ID compliant. The Transportation Security Administration is also looking at how using biometric data to verify identity would play out instead of manual identity document checks. A Maricopa County judge will let the audit of the 2020 election continue, for now at least. That's while the Attorney General of the state rejects a call for a probe into the audit. Here are the details.
On Tuesday, a Superior Court judge in Maricopa County made a statement about the 2020 election audit. He said he would not extend a temporary restraining order that would have stopped the election audit if Democrats in Arizona posted a $1 million bond. Last week, Democrats in the state filed a last-minute lawsuit attempting to block the audit. They claimed the contractors carrying out the audit are not properly securing ballots and equipment. Part of the state Senate says those claims lacked substance and that the judge shouldn't stop the audit. The audit that started last Friday is checking over 2 million ballots and dozens of electronic tabulators. Arizona's Attorney General has rejected a call for an investigation into the audit. Arizona's Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, who's a Democrat, wrote a letter to the Attorney General on Friday. She cited media reports about a lack of security in the audit site and called for a probe. But the Attorney General said Hobbs provided no facts to warrant the probe. Another hearing on whether the election audit will be allowed to continue was slated for Wednesday.
A former White House advisor has been arrested. He's charged by the FBI with stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from charter schools he helped found. 42-year-old Seth Andrew served under former President Barack Obama as a senior advisor in the Office of Educational Technology. He founded the charter school Chain Democracy Prep in 2005. The CEO of Democracy Prep wrote to families and students that over $200,000 was discovered missing by a series of financial safeguards. Andrew was arrested on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and making false statements to a financial institution. Federal prosecutors say Andrew used more than half of the allegedly stolen money to get better interest rates for a mortgage on his multi-million-dollar Manhattan apartment. Andrew's attorney told the Epoch Times his client will enter a not guilty plea. Former Secretary of State John Kerry is accused of leaking information about a U.S. ally to Iran. Kerry is now facing increasing pressure to step down. He denied the accusation Monday.
The New York Times reported on April 25th that John Kerry told Iran's foreign minister Israel had attacked Iran's interest in Syria at least 200 times. This came from an alleged leaked tape of a conversation that supposedly took place when Kerry was President Obama's Secretary of State. But Kerry denied the allegations. He tweeted on Monday, "This never happened, either when I was Secretary of State or since." Kerry is facing calls from Republicans to step down from his post as a U.S. Special Envoy for Climate Change. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United States Nikki Haley posted on Twitter, "This is disgusting on many levels. Biden and Kerry have to answer for why Kerry would be tipping off Iran, the #1 sponsor of terror, while stabbing one of our greatest partners, Israel, in the back." Alaskan Senator Dan Sullivan called for Kerry's resignation on the Senate floor Monday.
If this is true, I certainly hope other members of this body, Democrats and Republicans, will join me in calling for the resignation of John Kerry. Enough is enough.
Meanwhile, New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik tweeted, "This is a criminal act and John Kerry must be immediately investigated and prosecuted. President Biden must immediately remove John Kerry from any government or advisory position." According to the Washington Examiner, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo led the calls for Kerry to be investigated. Last Wednesday at a press conference on Capitol Hill, Pompeo slammed Kerry for his inappropriate meetings with Iran.
I'm actually doing this publicly and openly, unlike Secretary Kerry, who had private conversations with the Iranians that was trying to undermine our administration.
Pompeo said the tape proves what he has said for years, that Kerry informed the Iranians of Israeli operations.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has declined to say whether he thinks Congresswoman Liz Cheney is a good fit for party leadership. Cheney is the number 3 ranking House Republican and has been a vocal critic of former President Trump.
Is Cheney still a good fit for your leadership team, do you believe?
That's a question for the conference.
But what do you believe? What do you believe?
I think from a perspective, if you're sitting here at a retreat that's focused on policy and focused on the future of making America the next century, and you're talking about something else, you're not being productive.
McCarthy took the veiled shot at Cheney while speaking to reporters during the House Republicans' annual policy retreat. 2 factions of the Republican Party have been unfolding since President Trump left office. Those like McCarthy, who still see Trump as the head of the party, and Cheney, who thinks it's time for Republicans to move beyond Trump. The Supreme Court takes up a First Amendment case this week and involves whether schools have the right to enforce policies on speech conducted off campus.
The Supreme Court is set to hear the case of Brandy Levy. She got kicked off her school's cheerleading team for making a profanity-laced social media post. She argues that the school does not have the right to punish her for speech occurring off campus. A lower court already ruled in her favor. Her lawyer says it's a big case.
This is the most important student speech case that the Supreme Court has decided in over 50 years.
He says the school district is seeking to take away students' First Amendment rights.
The power that the school district is asking the court to give it would allow them to censor anything that is considered controversial, unpopular, certainly critical of the school.
The district argues that off-campus speech can harm school functions. They say a ruling against them would block teachers and administrators from addressing bullying, racism, and cheating. And these can all take place online, outside school, and during off hours. Levy's father says that's a parent's role. Levy is an 18-year-old college student now. She says she's proud she stuck with the case to protect students' rights to express themselves. Levy's lawyer says the Supreme Court could use the case to make a big statement on the First Amendment.
Now, it's going to depend exactly on what the court says, but the potential for a real blockbuster decision is certainly here.
The court's decision is expected in June.
The Supreme Court rules that an illegal immigrant with a felony DUI can't argue that his deportation was invalid. The Mexican national who brought the case was granted permanent resident status in the United States in 1990, but he lost that status in 1991 after a conviction for driving under the influence. At that time, it was considered a deportable crime. He's arguing the removal is invalid because the crime is not a deportable offense anymore. The man was indicted again in 2017 after re-entering the U.S. illegally. Justice Sonia Sotomayor told the man's lawyer that he should have worked to get the past indictment voided before re-entering the country illegally. U.S. lawmakers grilled President Biden's Afghanistan peace envoy Tuesday. They're asking how women will be protected if the hardline Islamist Taliban takes control after U.S. troops withdraw. The lawmakers say they'll withhold funding if rights gains are reversed.
The U.S. envoy to Afghanistan says Washington intends to protect human rights there, even after a planned complete military withdrawal later this year. Zalmay Khalilzad testified to Congress on Tuesday.
We intend to maintain our embassy and will continue to provide development assistance, promote economic investment, and advocate to preserve the gains for minorities and for women, including their meaningful participation in the ongoing negotiations and their appropriate representation throughout society.
President Joe Biden announced earlier this month that the U.S. would withdraw its military out of Afghanistan by September 11th, 20 years after the 9/11 attacks that sent the country to war. But on Tuesday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee expressed concern over that move, particularly for women's rights, if turmoil breaks out as a result. Republican Senator Ron Johnson is a member of the committee and argued women would be most vulnerable in a civil war if one were to break out.
What can you say publicly in terms of what the predictions are in terms of Taliban treatment of women should they take over the government? Again, personally, I'm concerned about public executions and other forms of brutality that will just be so incredibly offensive. And if that's the case, what do we do?
When the Taliban ruled Afghanistan in the late 1990s, women were barred from much of public society, like education, work, or showing parts of their bodies. Moral offenses were punished by flogging and stoning. The Biden administration has pledged to continue providing aid to Afghanistan even after its departure, but has also threatened to make an enemy out of Afghanistan if the country did not protect human rights.
Iranian attack boats once again got a little too close to American warships in the Persian Gulf. This time, Iran's Navy came within about 70 yards of the ships. It happened Monday night. Officials say the Iranian vessels approached at an unnecessarily close range with unknown intent. According to a Navy spokeswoman, one of the U.S. ships had to fire warning shots. That prompted the Iranian vessels to back away to a safe distance. This was the second incident involving Iran's Navy this month in the Persian Gulf. On April 2nd, 4 Iranian ships came within 70 yards of 2 Coast Guard cutters. Coming up, Chicago activists work to combat gun violence by empowering the youth. They say grassroots action changes lives. New York City's mayor proposes the city's budget, biggest budget ever. It's sustainable, and where is all that money coming from? Find out more here on NTD News. Chicago's gun violence continues to rock the community. Just from this past weekend, 25 people have gun wounds, and 3 are dead. And while there are policy proposals to combat the violence, we'll look at the community-level work being done to empower Chicago's youth. NTD's Christina Kim has that story.
In 2020, Chicago saw a surge in gun violence with 769 homicides and over 4,000 shooting victims. Officials like Mayor Lori Lightfoot have proposed plans to try to solve the issue, but face challenges with the pandemic. We speak to Chicagoan Aisha Oliver, who believes grassroots efforts can be just as effective, if not more. Oliver says she grew up with great mentors. Her grandparents and school teacher taught her to believe in herself and strive for the best. But that same message was not reflected in her community. Oliver says that's when she knew she had to do something to help.
I had witnessed gun violence and drugs and things like that at a very young age, and there was always something in me that let me know that this just was not normal, that it was not something that I wanted to see for the rest of my life.
So in 2009, she started her organization Root to Fruit, where she mentors youth in Chicago. Every day, she works to turn people's wounds into wisdom. Oliver works with youth who she affectionately calls her own children. She hopes her mentees know that their surroundings don't define them, and their mentality has the potential to change everything.
If you conquer the mind, you conquer the world. And that changed my life because it made me realize that it all starts up here. I had to build my mind just like I had to build any other muscle in my body.
Root to Fruit sometimes partners with community leaders to mentor the youth, takes them to visit colleges, or goes on road trips to show them what's outside of Chicago. Oliver also shows up for their sports games, recitals, and even goes to court on behalf of her mentees, so they know there's someone who believes in them and is cheering them on.
And these are young people who, they want great things for themselves also, but if you don't see it every day, and we have this saying in Root to Fruit that a child can't be what they can't see.
This summer, Root to Fruit will be partnering with local businesses, churches, and parks to create a safe zone to partake in a variety of activities. One day at a time, Oliver says they will rebuild the village within itself and that they'll see the fruits of their labor soon enough. Christina Kim, NTD News.
New York City is spending money like never before, and they're able to do so thanks to federal stimulus money. NTD's Arian Pastar has the city's budget summary.
New York City is entering a new fiscal year soon. Now the mayor introduced the city's highest budget ever. It's called the recovery budget and worth almost $100 billion. Now the mayor wants to increase spending by almost $10 billion compared to last year. But critics say that increase is not sustainable. Two factors enable the increased spending: federal aid and expected tax revenue. But the mayor's documents don't specify in which area he expects taxes to increase.
I don't see really any areas where an increase in tax revenue looks like it will come about.
He added that even if they increase taxes on the wealthy, as the mayor said they would, those people could just keep moving out of the city. And federal tax money will likely stop coming in too, because national debt keeps increasing.
At some point, somebody is going to say in government, we can't keep doing this. We're going to have to work to solve this deficit problem.
According to experts, the city should guarantee a sustainable income.
We need to devote city resources to bringing back Midtown, bringing back the corporations. That's the revenue engine of New York City budget.
He added many corporations found that they can save lots of money by letting people work from home. So the city has to find ways to bring them back. And that starts with the basics.
Quality of life in the streets, crime. These things are New York City government's prime responsibility.
The mayor still has to finalize the budget with city council members. The budget's due at the end of June. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Still to come, the Biden administration introduces a new mega spending package plan. But how to pay for it? By almost doubling the capital gains tax. Tens of thousands of waste objects are discovered off the coast of California. They're reportedly leaching DDT, a toxic chemical compound thought to cause cancer in humans. All that and more in just a moment.
We're becoming more and more urban. We lose our connection with nature. This little girl lives in a world of natural beauty, nature all around her. Not everybody has this opportunity. Things are growing all around her, all sort of handmade things. The artist has portrayed a scene that is so comforting and so grounded that we can experience this ourselves. The artist himself has to be absolutely natural. And it's not easy to do because children are hard to paint. Birds are hard to paint. They don't sit still. This is quite an accomplishment, reflecting nature back to us. It's just a pure, natural painting.
Put the keys down, Kevin.
But I'm gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
My text-to-emoji ratio has gotten a little out of hand.
A little?
Yep, I'm definitely gonna call a ride home.
I felt accomplished after I got my diploma. Made me feel that I could take on whatever challenges life throws at you.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
The Federal Communications Commission approves a SpaceX plan to deploy some Starlink satellites at a lower Earth orbit than planned. But the FCC includes a number of conditions to ensure the plan's safety. The Elon Musk-led company had asked the FCC for approval to fly almost 3,000 satellites at a lower orbit. It's part of the plan to provide high-speed broadband internet services to people who lack access. SpaceX told the agency that the change in altitude would improve space safety, reduce interference, and improve customer experience. In addition to the safety measures, the FCC said SpaceX agreed to accept that the lower altitude satellites could encounter interference from satellites deployed under Amazon's satellite project. As Congress is in the process of negotiating details of an infrastructure package, Biden sets his eye on another goal, another $1 trillion package to fund what some call human infrastructure. But it comes with another tax hike proposal, this time on individuals.
An estimated $1.8 trillion to fund things like national child care, paid family leave, unemployment insurance and health care, and free community college. To pay for it, Biden's proposing to double the capital gains tax. A capital gains tax is a tax on the profit earned from investments such as stocks and property. Right now, investors pay nearly 24% on their long-term profits, and Biden's proposal would nearly double that tax rate to nearly 40%, the highest in at least 65 years and among the highest in the world.
A lot of folks are going to focus on the federal rate of 39.6%, but when you include the state and local capital gains rates, we're looking at average capital gains rates topping out north of 48%. For example, in California, it tops out at 56.7%. Over half for the capital gains rate alone.
By raising the capital gains tax, Biden's goal is to increase federal revenue to pay for these big spending packages. But there are other factors that could lead to this not playing out as planned.
Because these households who will be facing this higher tax can decide whether or not they realize their gains and pay this tax, a lot of them are going to decide just to hold on to the asset that has that gain in the hope that that rate goes down in the future. And that means depriving the government of revenue.
Watson says they estimate this change could cost the federal government upwards of $120 billion over 10 years. And it could cause Americans to invest in foreign markets, which would make America less competitive. The Biden administration defends the tax hike by pointing out that only a small number of households will be impacted by the increase. But some critics argue on the matter of principle. Republican Representative Kevin Brady told Fox Business it's the definition of socialism when the government has more control over your assets than you do. This newly proposed tax hike faces tough odds becoming a reality since many Republicans oppose tax increases. So just like Biden's infrastructure plan, this new spending and tax plan faces tough negotiation talks in the months ahead. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Hostile foreign regimes will now have to think twice before messing with Texas. A bill just passed the state Senate with flying colors that bans them from the state's critical infrastructure. One of the bill's main authors explains why it's so important. NTD's Allison Lee has the details.
It prohibits countries that are hostile to our nation, specifically China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, from tying into our critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure such as our communications, cybersecurity, our electric grid, hazardous waste, and our water supply system.
Texas State Senator Donna Campbell gives the example of a proposed wind farm project near an Air Force base in the southern border. The Chinese owner behind this investment is a former officer from the Chinese regime's military. His company bought 130,000 acres of land in western Texas beginning in 2015.
What is a Chinese citizen who's a billionaire? What is his interest whenever he's a high-ranking member of the Chinese Communist Party? What's his interest in this project? As we looked into it, it started looking more and more like a Trojan horse.
The investment drew scrutiny last year, with many experts believing it poses a national security threat. This is because the Chinese company might be able to collect intelligence from the military base, and the wind farm will be connected to the Texas electric grid. Texas State Representative Tan Parker highlights Texas's strategic importance to the nation.
Texas is home to 15 military installations and over 227,000 uniformed and Department of Defense civilian personnel. Texas hosts an array of combat-capable military units and innovative military installations on the forefront of cutting-edge technology.
The new bill will prohibit businesses from signing any contracts with Chinese, Russian, Iranian, and North Korean-based companies or companies owned by citizens of the 4 countries in relation to infrastructure. It has now moved to the Texas State House. Allison Lee, NTD News.
A recent marine expedition found tens of thousands of items likely polluting the ocean with the toxic chemical DDT. That's according to a release from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at University of California, San Diego. The effort originally sought to map the seafloor between Los Angeles and Santa Catalina Island. The DDT waste barrels seem to have been dumped near Catalina Island decades ago. Senator Dianne Feinstein says they're impacting marine life and could pose a public health threat. Sonar imaging also showed more than 100,000 objects on the ocean floor. More than 27,000 of them are believed to be chemical-containing barrels, some dating back to World War II. Scientists have also found high levels of chemicals in certain sea life along the California coast. According to a study published in Frontiers in Marine Science, pollutants such as DDT played a significant role in the development of cancer in mammals. And just ahead, another plagiarism scandal in China's auto industry. This time, a Chinese car maker is believed to have copied the design of the iconic Volkswagen Beetle. Documents allege the Wuhan Institute of Virology has ties to the Chinese military. The institute has reportedly been collecting viruses for a state-led project since as early as 2012. That and more on NTD News. Last week, the U.S. Senate introduced a bipartisan bill, the Endless Frontiers Act, that would strengthen America's ability to compete with the Chinese regime in science and technology. The initiator of the bill talked about its importance.
The Endless Frontier Act is an initiative in response to China's very significant investments in research and development and sort of cutting-edge 21st century technologies, things like artificial intelligence and quantum computing, genomics.
The bill would allocate $100 billion over the next 5 years to bolster U.S. research and development to counter China's. It would also provide $10 billion to establish regional innovation hubs. Last Wednesday, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, along with Senator Todd Young and 10 other senators from both sides of the aisle, reintroduced the Endless Frontier Act. A similar bill has also been introduced in the House. Senator Young said that if the U.S. is going to outcompete the Chinese Communist Party and make sure American values prevail, it's essential to invest in these areas. The bill can also motivate the American people.
Their creativity can be harnessed in this whole of society effort to ensure, just as we did during the Cold War, that Western values of freedom and opportunity and agency among rank and file citizens prevails over the state capitalist model of the Chinese Communist Party.
Right now, reportedly more than 200 amendments to the bill have been filed. This could delay the vote on the bill, but it also shows great bipartisan interest. In addition, the White House press secretary issued a statement in support. According to a national intelligence report, the Chinese regime is the #1 threat to U.S. national security. Lately, Beijing has boosted their investment in strategic technology.
The controversial virology lab in Wuhan, China, may have collaborated with the Chinese military on virus research. A Chinese regime agency funding the research says it has seen great progress. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more on the story.
The Wuhan Institute of Virology, or WIV, has allegedly worked with the Chinese regime's People's Liberation Army, or PLA, on a massive project investigating animal viruses, including bat viruses. Documents from China's National Natural Science Foundation show the state-led project first began in 2012. UK-based newspaper The Daily Mail first obtained the documents on Sunday. The project was said to discover new viruses that could infect humans and was said to investigate their evolution. The project has 5 team leaders, including Xi Zhenli. She is also widely known as Batwoman for her field of study. Another team leader is a senior PLA officer and expert on bioterrorism, Cao Wu-chen. He is also the director of the Military Biosafety Expert Committee. Professor Xi denied her tie to the PLA last month, saying, "I don't know of any military work at the Wuhan Institute of Virology." But the U.S. State Department fact sheet from January claims there is secret military activity at the Wuhan lab. Cao Wuchun's presence as a military expert on the team leaders list is also suspicious. He is listed on project reports as a researcher, working closely with other military scientists. And he also sits on the WIV's advisory board, according to the Daily Mail. Cao was also the second in command of the military team sent to take over the Wuhan lab during the initial stages of the outbreak last year. China's National Natural Science Foundation said in 2018 that the virus research project achieved significant progress. They are the state body that funded the project. And another team leader, Zhang Yongzhen, was the first to announce the genetic sequence of COVID-19 last January. During the first 3 years of the project, he took the team to many provinces in China to collect animal samples. He found 143 new viruses during this time. The massive sample collection, according to the Daily Mail, allowed Professor Xi to discover a strain named RATG13. It's the closest known strain to the one causing the CCP virus pandemic. A new plagiarism scandal is making headlines in China. A Chinese automaker is allegedly copying the designs of Western vehicles. Multiple new models on display at the Shanghai Auto Show look almost identical to pre-existing European models. And Chinese carmaker Great Wall's 3 models are raising some eyebrows. Great Wall's electric car Punk Cat is believed to be based on the iconic Volkswagen Beetle. U.S. website CarScoop says Volkswagen is considering taking legal actions against the Chinese carmaker. The German company has stopped making the Beetle model since 2019, but it still owns the design rights. Volkswagen's new trademark e-Beetle suggests the legendary Bug might make a comeback as an electric car. The Volkswagen Beetle isn't the only Western car model being replicated. Porsche and Rolls-Royce are in similar circumstances. Let's compare Rolls-Royce's SUV with Great Wall's Tank 800, plus Porsche sedan with Great Wall's Lightning Cat. Great Wall isn't the first Chinese company that is drawing scrutiny. Over the years, consumers have seen Chinese clones of many Western vehicles, including the Mercedes-Benz G-Class 4x4 versus Chinese-made BJ80C, Porsche's Macan versus Chinese-made Zoti SR9, Rolls-Royce's Phantom versus China's Geely GE Limo, and Range Rover's SUV versus China's Landwind X7, among others.
Coming up, a medicine professor talks about if herd immunity can be achieved in the current CCP virus crisis. He says variants could make things tougher. More on that in just a minute.
If you're like me, and I think it's actually most of us, then you're getting really fed up with the nonsense going on inside the banking system. I mean, we've worked hard our entire lives to retire comfortably. We just recovered from the crash of 2008, and it seems like it's about to happen all over again. Look at the too-big-to-fail banks. They're only getting bigger as the Fed hands them trillions of dollars daily, while simple folks like you and me, we're only getting the short end of the stick. That's why I'm glad I found this book called The Bank Failure Survival Guide. Give us a call, and we'll send you a free copy with no obligations whatsoever, just one American to another, telling you about some options that you might not have considered. Call 866-239-2619 today for your free copy of the Bank Failure Survival Guide. That's 866-239-2619.
It's just clear as day. The media, whether it's broadcast, cable, or print media, has become extremely biased. And I started looking online for alternative ways to get information. And I saw an ad for a free trial. And I looked at it and I said, Epoch Times. I mean, come on, this is end of days type of stuff. I mean, what are they going to be talking about here? And I said, well, it's a free trial. Let me dig in. Is it giving me both sides? Is it giving me an objective point of view here? I have looked for opportunities to see where they might be biased, and I don't find it. It has given me a level of trust in media that I didn't think I'd ever get back. I love the Epoch Times because it has renewed my faith in the idea that a reliable, responsible, non-biased source of information is available. And I can say that I love it because of that.
In a surprising move, the Council of Europe snubbed a Court of Human Rights candidate linked to billionaire George Soros' non-governmental organization. This comes after a report that raised concern over the independence of the court. NTD's David Vives has more.
On April 20th, the Council of Europe elected a new Belgian judge to the European Court of Human Rights. Among the three candidates proposed by the Belgian government was a lawyer employed by billionaire George Soros' non-governmental organization, the Open Society Foundations. Despite its considerable financial and political power, the NGO failed to get its candidate elected. This comes after a report published by the European Center for Law and Justice, which points out the potential influence of Soros on the courts of human rights through the use of his NGO. According to the report, out of 100 judges who served on the court between 2009 and 2029, 22 have strong links to various NGOs. And of those 22 judges, 12 are affiliated with Soros Open Society Foundations. Immediately after this report, members of the European Parliament addressed the issue of the independence of the Court of Human Rights.
Soros created the Open Society Foundations, which has some considerable influence over EU institutions, and that's the outcome of the investigation of the report.
Last week, the Council of Europe replied to the members of Parliament and voiced support for their concerns over preserving the independence of the court. The director of the European Center for Law and Justice says this shows the veracity of the report's findings. Author Stanislas Berton, who has studied the influence of Soros, agrees.
We should follow the money, look at how George Soros created associations in different countries, Eastern European countries. He uses it as leverage to get some people in his association elected to the European Court of Human Rights, and the court delivers verdicts that will be supportive of his interests.
The report says most of the judges elected to the Court of Human Rights come from Eastern European countries. It says Albania, which is vulnerable to corruption, received $131 million from the Open Society Foundations. Meanwhile, one Albanian judge from the NGO was elected to the Court of Human Rights. 8 judges are expected to be elected to the court this year. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
The concept of herd immunity has been debated since the start of the pandemic, not without controversy. When will it happen, or not at all? What's our current understanding of herd immunity? NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us some answers.
Herd immunity is often mentioned in the media as a target to be achieved, or the golden threshold where the COVID-19 virus is somewhat kept at bay and life goes back to normal. Some would suggest it might just be around the corner. Take a look at this Times headline from the 3rd of February. Given the dire situation facing India right now, perhaps there was something wrong with that assumption. A recent dynamic modelling study by University College London says that the UK has reached effective immunity threshold of 68% already on the 25th of April. Effective immunity threshold is related to herd immunity. Estimates about when herd immunity will be reached vary. Most estimates are in the 60 to 70% area. The New York Times quotes America's chief immunologist Dr. Anthony Fauci as saying in December, "We really don't know what the real number is. I think the real range is somewhere between 70 to 90%, but I'm not going to say 90%. I spoke to Professor in Medicine Dr. Paul Hunter to clear up the issue. He says you need 3 things for herd immunity to happen. Firstly, enough people need to be immune to stop the spread. Also,
you've got to have a immunity that actually lasts more than just a few months. And also you've got to have a virus that doesn't mutate and doesn't generate new variants that can overcome herd immunity and then start spreading again. And I think the answer to all of those 3 questions is we're not going to achieve that for COVID.
Also, regarding the new variants,
we know a lot now about new variants that are appearing, and the evidence is very strongly that many of these new variants, the South African variant and possibly as well the Indian variant, or likely the Indian variant, will be able to overcome, at least in part, immunity of vaccination.
Meaning the vaccines may not be completely effective against those variants. Professor Hunter says even with natural infection, as opposed to via a vaccine, people can start to become infected again 3 months down the line.
There is still protection from a natural infection, and valuable protection, but it isn't complete enough to enable herd immunity to really develop.
The consensus among epidemiologists is that COVID-19 is here to stay.
I've been saying for many months, our grandchildren's grandchildren will be getting COVID, but hopefully by then it won't be anywhere near the degree of severity that we've been seeing this last year.
I asked him how long we might expect for the restrictive measures to stay in place. He says as more people are immunised, we will come to live in a balance with this virus.
And I don't expect that we will be still needing anywhere near the degree of social distancing that we've had this winter in a few years' time. And I hopefully don't expect to see that this coming winter.
But he says it is difficult to predict, particularly with the occurrence of variants. The speed of getting vaccinating people is also a factor. Professor Hunter says there are far more cases of COVID around than they would expect to see. This is speeding up the mutation of the virus. He says this is because we have not had prior exposure to the virus.
But even when we are infected, we carry a lot more virus. And the more virus there is, the more likely a mutation might arise that could ultimately lead to a new variant that would cause concern.
Public Health England is investigating the Indian variant. They have not yet labelled it as a variant of concern. As far as herd immunity goes, there is still much debate, and in reality, there is still much that can happen. Neil Woodrow, NTD News.
Over to Europe. Britain spent billions of dollars on brand new aircraft carriers. Now, one of them is ready to have its first operational deployment. Its destination is Asia. NTD's Lily Joe brings us the details.
The UK's largest signal of maritime and air power in a generation will set sail next month as the aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth departs for its first operational deployment. The £3 billion warship, with 8 RAF F-35B stealth fighter jets on board, will depart for Asia, accompanied by 6 Royal Navy ships, a submarine, 14 naval helicopters, and a company of Royal Marines.
At 65,000 tonnes, HMS Queen Elizabeth and her sister ship HMS Prince of Wales are the most powerful surface ships ever constructed in Britain. Longer than Parliament and taller than Nelson's Column, she has a range of more than 10,000 nautical miles and can fly 72 fast-jet sorties per day.
The carrier strike group will also include the US destroyer USS The Sullivans and the Dutch frigate HNLMS Everton. The group will carry out visits to India, Japan, South Korea and Singapore.
The deployment will see the units of the strike group visiting over 40 countries and undertaking over 70 engagements, visits, air exercises and operations. Critically, these events will provide excellent opportunities for the UK to develop new and existing trade and political links, particularly in the Indo-Pacific.
The government's integrated review into foreign, defence, security and development policy says the UK will invest in enhanced China-facing capabilities. Wallace says the UK will stand up for its values and stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves.
We are not going to the other side of the world to be provocative. We will sail through the South China Sea. We will be confident but not confrontational.
Sea power expert Dr. Siddharth Kaushal from the Royal United Service Institute says the deployment is a part of a broader tilt towards the Indo-Pacific region.
But what the deployment of the CSG, as well as sort of deepening defense engagement with key regional powers does represent is a greater emphasis being placed on regions that previously had been sort of placed beyond the remit of British security thinking.
Prior to leaving the UK, the CSG will take part in a major exercise, Strike Warrior, off the coast of Scotland before departing for the Mediterranean. Lily Joe, NTD News.
Coming up, the All England Lawn Tennis Club announces big changes to the Wimbledon tournament starting in 2022. This year's tournament is limited to 25% capacity. Find out more here on NTD News. Italy is easing COVID-19 restrictions in some regions, so Italians are eager to flock to museums and reconnect with their friends over an aperitivo.
In Rome, museums and theatres are welcoming visitors after the government eased COVID-19 restrictions on Monday. It comes as the capital and other regions moved into a yellow zone with fewer COVID-19 restrictions. Without crowds or long waiting lines, visitors could admire the ancient masterpieces up close, though restrictions over social distancing remained in place. Theatres and cinemas are also allowed to reopen. Drama lovers rushed to Teatro Vascello, where productions were back on stage after months. And Rome's famous Colosseum reopened for business too. One visitor from Florence was delighted.
Sono molto sorpresa della riapertura del Colosseo.
I'm really surprised the Colosseum is open. I thought it would be later, but I'll take this opportunity immediately because this will be the only chance. I hope this will really be a reopening and not a kind of hiccup like last summer.
The amphitheatre is one of Italy's most visited landmarks, but there are virtually no foreign tourists in the capital. Bars and restaurants are now able to serve people seated outdoors in certain regions. So Milan residents rushed to bars to enjoy an open-air aperitivo.
This is what we have been missing for quite a while. So we are happy, and we want to live and go back to a normal life.
Venice is not yet crowded, with tourists riding down the canals on gondolas. Some residents enjoyed their iconic spritz near the canals.
The Wimbledon tennis tournament will look a little different in 2022, with the matches taking place on Middle Sunday. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
The Wimbledon Championships will become a 14-day tournament starting next year. The All England Lawn Tennis Club said on Tuesday matches are now set to be played on Middle Sunday. The first Sunday of Wimbledon is normally a rest day. Tournament organizers use it to get the courts back in top shape for the latter rounds.
Thanks to improved grass court maintenance technology over the past 5 years or so and other measures, we are now confident that we will be able to look after the courts, most particularly centre court, without a full day of rest during the fortnight.
Middle Sunday is also known as People's Sunday. That's because tickets have occasionally been made available for general sale that day, when rain delays have caused matches to be postponed. In another massive change, organizers have banned players from renting private houses near the grounds.
The minimised risk environment was an absolute requirement of the government and Public Health England to get permission to stage the tournament, and particularly to get permission to bring all of those athletes into the UK and for them to be able to avoid having to quarantine on entry to the UK.
The British government has allowed 25% capacity at sports arenas. All England Club hopes that level will be increased closer to the championships. Ticket prices will be the same as last year, when the tournament was cancelled due to the pandemic. Wimbledon was the only Grand Slam cancelled last year. The club's chairman, Ian Hewitt, said the tournament had collected an insurance payout of $250 million. $50 million of that went to the Lawn Tennis Association. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's all for now. Catch us again tonight at 6:30 Eastern. I'm Kevin Hogan.
We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.